Nearly 20,000 people are unhoused in Massachusetts, a number that's risen in recent years thanks in large part to the rising cost of housing in the state. And cities and towns are struggling to help their residents on their own. That's why 8 communities are pooling their resources. Malden, Arlington, Chelsea, Everett, Medford, Melrose, Revere, and Winthrop plan to split nearly $2 million in federal American Rescue Plan money for programs to support people experiencing homelessness. Malden's Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development, Alex Pratt, joins me now, along with Kelly Turley, Associate Director of the Mass Coalition for the Homeless, and Laura Rossi, CEO of Housing Families. Thank you all for being here. So, Alex, you're running this program. Obviously, it's 8 cities and towns, but you've kind of been heading it. Why is it important for these municipalities to be combining forces?
Homelessness is a problem that affects every city and town in Massachusetts, from the big cities like Boston to small rural communities. The problem is that for smaller communities and even smaller cities, we don't have the resources to address this one by one. We have to work together to solve this problem. And so that's what this program is all about. It's about pooling our resources, but also recognizing that serving the homeless population means meeting them where they are. And they might sleep in Malden one night and then Medford the next, and they're still someone that we need to serve.
Right. And I think, there's been so much focus on Boston. Is a part of this to relieve some of that pressure from Boston? Because we've heard from Boston Mayor Michelle Wu in the past that leaders across the state need to come in and offer resources to address the statewide housing crisis. Is part of this about relieving Boston? No, it's not. It's about addressing the challenges that we have in our own communities. We've had homelessness in Malden and in all of these 8 communities for a very long time. So it's not about relieving Boston. It's really about addressing the needs in our communities and making sure that no matter where someone is homeless, that they're going to have some services that will help them stay alive and get housed. And Kelly, you can speak to that. I mean, we've done so many stories together about the issue of homelessness in Boston, but across the state, kind of what does the scope of that look like now?
We're seeing that in every community, as Alex noted, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural, that there are high rates of housing instability and homelessness, and those rates continue to increase. A lot of the discussion recently has been around newly arrived immigrant families and individuals coming to the Commonwealth, but even before there was an increase in the number of newly arrived immigrants, we saw high rates of housing instability and homelessness that have only grown. A lot of it is connected to the loss of homelessness prevention dollars that came in from the federal government during the peak pandemic period, the loss of eviction protections and partial restoration of those protections, but that we are seeing the lack of deeply affordable units and wages that aren't keeping up with the cost of rent. And so we are seeing high number of individuals and families across the Commonwealth experiencing homelessness.
And Laura, you'll be working with these municipalities, but you already have been, right? With Housing Families, you've been working on this for decades. What are you seeing right now in these communities? Can you kind of describe the need and talk a little bit about what you'll be doing when this program starts up in April?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. To Alex's point, I'm really excited about this program because it is working within the 8 communities and not having to kind of piecemeal where our services are going. So we are putting together a team where we will have, the director of our homelessness services overseeing a program manager who's going to be supervising 3 case managers that are going to be going out and meeting folks that are on the street and kind of determining what their needs are and building relationships with them. We're also going to have a mental health clinician as part of the team, just to kind of help us with encouraging them to move on and find other places that are safe for them to be. And again, with that relationship building piece. And then we have just a broader homelessness prevention program that is more, we'll be working with folks who are maybe bouncing around from house to house or, at risk of eviction or has some domestic violence issues. So we have a broad range and just really, especially on the individual side, really excited about the opportunity to work across the communities.
So you'll be using, this, I think it's 1.8 million in ARPA funds, and individual municipalities were already using their share of ARPA funds and finding that it just wasn't enough. By pooling these, will that be enough? Is this going to be enough? This plan is over the next 4 years. Will you be needing to bring in more funding to support this?
These 8 communities have a long history, a long track record of working together to build affordable housing with federal funds. With these particular federal funds, these 8 communities collectively applied for and received it, so it's separate from the ARPA funding, the American Rescue Plan Act funding that cities and towns have been using for the last several years. So we're fortunate to be able to apply for and use these resources together. With anything, we see that the federal government and the state government are the best providers of funds for cities and towns to take on this work, and that cities and towns are usually best equipped to know their communities so well, especially working with nonprofits who are on the ground like Housing Families. So what we really are planning on doing is over the next 4 years, building a case using our work, using our evidence of work and the benefits that we can produce to be in dialogue with both our state legislators and our congressional delegation to advocate for more funding going on, because this problem is not going away.
Right. And will you have to make tough decisions about, how are you planning to make those tough decisions, that they're inevitable, about which communities receive which services or how much funding? Will this mean that ultimately some places who might be in greater need will receive more? How will that work?
The beauty of this approach is that the 8 cities and towns are not looking at this as 8 different jurisdictions for Laura and her team to respond to. It's one jurisdiction for her team to respond to. So we're not looking at, Chelsea, for example, does a lot of great work on homelessness prevention and response, but we're not measuring, what our resources in Chelsea will be versus our resources in Melrose, and docking Melrose or docking Chelsea for one thing or another. We're really looking at where is the greatest need and where can we spend our resources.
And a huge part of this, I think, is also about people at risk of homelessness, right, and keeping people in their homes. Can you talk about the scale of that, Kelly, across the state?
Yeah, it's enormous. It's really a huge issue that we're encouraging legislators and the governor to focus on more intensely. There's a lot of focus on how can we make sure that we're helping families and individuals avoid entering shelter, but not necessarily providing the resources that are needed to do that. And so we're seeing in every community across the Commonwealth an increasing number of families and individuals who are falling behind on rent, unable to access the resources to stay in place. One key tool that has been used that has been weakened this year is the RAFT Homelessness Prevention Program, Residential Assistance for Families in Transition. Up until last year, families and individuals could access up to $10,000 to pay for back rent, back utility bills, as well as startup costs for new apartments. And the maximum grant in that program has been decreased to $7,000, regardless of household size, regardless of the going rent in that community. And we're seeing that more and more families and individuals who otherwise could have retained their housing are being pushed into greater housing instability or into homelessness. And we're hoping that in the upcoming state budget for the fiscal year that starts in July, that we'll be able to restore some of those resources, not just through the RAFT program, but as well through parallel programs like the home-based program, which is targeted to families that otherwise would be in shelter.
And Laura, in your work with families, are you seeing a lot of folks who are really on that brink, right, who maybe thought that no one ever thinks, right, that they're going to be in that position, but seeing more and more families who are at risk in that way?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a big influx. During COVID, there were a lot more resources being put in to help folks stay in their home. And as Kelly mentioned, we've been scaling back on some of those resources. So RAFT is the #1 go-to tool that we have to help folks. And to Alex's point earlier, in terms of what else needs to be done, the shelter system is needed and it's very important, but it only works when we also have housing for folks to go into. So it will be critical that we're all advocating for the preservation of the subsidized housing that's already out there, as well as creating more so that people can move across the continuum and into permanent housing.
And Alex, I understand these communities have worked together on a number of things before. So I had asked, I think I had asked you when I wrote the story, but just about why these 8 communities, because I'm wondering if there's a possibility or some planning about moving ahead with an expansion, right, to all communities across the state, or if there's some parallel, these are all towns kind of northwest of Boston, but why these 8?
These communities have been working together since 1991 to collectively apply for and expend funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, mostly to build affordable housing, including for groups like this population that we're looking to serve with this new program. And that has given us the track record and the trust working together to take on new opportunities like this one. The good news for other communities who want to be doing this is that they are probably already a part of these consortiums to use HUD money for affordable housing. They just might not know about it.
Right.
And so it really is a great opportunity for select board members, for residents, for providers, for any resident who's really interested. Call Town Hall and see how they're using their HUD money to help homeless people.
And you've set out the blueprint already. So this is going into effect in April. Do you have a specific timeline yet?
We're still working on a specific launch date. Laura's been working on hiring folks, and we're excited to roll the services out very soon. We don't have a date specified yet beyond just April, but believe me, we're sure that as soon as the program starts, there's going to be a lot of demand for this.
Great. Alex Pratt, Kelly Turley, and Laura Rossi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
for having
Tori.
Thanks for having us.